It's super important to get this right. It has always been important, but I think it's just that the movement has grown bigger. And now there's much more awareness around it and people start understanding the variety that we have as well. So I'm autistic and ADHD, and it comes with a lot of strengths, but it also comes with challenges because the world is not really set up for people like me fully in every way. And I think as the whole world population grows, it's just important to try to find a way where we are all included. The urgency of making sure we can fit in. So people are talking about, do we have an epidemic of neurodivergence, ADHD, and autistic? That no, we don't. We've just been so hidden.
Hi, I'm Josh Emmerson, Associate Partner within the Transformation, Digital and Technology practice at Eton Bridge Partners. Welcome to our new series of podcasts talking about neurodiversity in the workplace. Neurodiversity is a concept that all humans vary in terms of their neurocognitive ability. Everyone has both talents and things they struggle with. However, for some people, the variation between those strengths and challenges is more pronounced. Neurodiversity can be a competitive advantage when the individual is in the right environment, making use of these strengths, instead of constantly trying to overcome challenges. To achieve this, we must create inclusive spaces to work and learn that reduce disabling factors and amplify diverse abilities. And perhaps it is not enough to simply accept these differences, where instead we could be doing more to celebrate these cognitive differences to truly harness the power of neurodiversity in the workplace. As an executive search, interim management and consulting firm, we're incredibly fortunate to be able to meet people from all walks of life across lots of different organizations. So we've invited people from our network to share their stories and their experiences of neurodiversity in the workplace and their own insights on what we can do to help create a more inclusive workplace. I'm delighted to be sitting here today with Charlotte Valeur. Charlotte is a former merchant banker, corporate governance expert, and a former chair of the UK's Institute of Directors. She has chaired 3 international companies and has non-executive directorships at private and public companies. In late 2021, Charlotte launched the Institute of Neurodiversity to give a voice to all neurodiverse individuals, to campaign for inclusion and to make sure they are understood, represented, and valued equally. Charlotte, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting.
Look, Charlotte, just to kick us off, would you mind telling me what neurodiversity means to you?
Yeah, it was actually a term that was coined by Australian sociologist Judy Singer back in the 90s. For me, it's basically talking about a natural variation of humankind. We naturally have different kind of brains, and all together we are neurodiverse. And then we have a sort of normative type that we call neurotypicals, and then everyone else compared to that we call neurodivergent. But hopefully one day we don't really need any of that. We just understand that everybody has a different mind.
What isn't neurodiversity?
What isn't neurodiversity? It isn't something that's wrong. It isn't something to be cured or fixed. It's not one type. Like some people think that neurodivergent people are all white men in technology, Sheldons or a Rain Man. It's not that either. We are literally everything that you get in the wider population. We're present everywhere. We are not a fixed type.
And people say once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, don't
That's
they?
right. That's right. I mean, again, the variation is just as much as you find in the general population, but there has been some desire to put us into boxes. We need to fit into these neat boxes. This is how we behave. That's how we behave, and it's not quite like that. We're all very, very different.
And you mentioned something earlier, actually, neurotypical privilege. Actually, would you mind just sharing more around that, please?
I think it's sort of a new term that has emerged over the last couple of years. The neurotypical privilege is really that you're born into a world that's set up for you, as opposed to neurodivergent people who are born into a world that's not set up for us. We are born with a much wider sensory system generally, but the world is not taking that into account. So I think the privilege is that how you're born, the world is fitting you. And when you're not, that becomes a barrier to sort of fully participate as a citizen in society. So the neurotypicals have the privilege that society fits them. And we would like to see people acknowledge that privilege, because once you acknowledge it, you can also then try to share it more and broader and help more people have that privilege, i.e. help change the world in a way so that we're all privileged enough that the world works for us all.
Yeah, that makes sense. And why is this so important? And why now?
It's super important to get this right. It has always been important, but I think it's just that the movement has grown bigger, and now there's much more awareness around it, and people start understanding the variety that we have as well. So I'm autistic and ADHD, and it comes with a lot of strengths, but it also comes with challenges because the world is not really set up for people like me fully in every way. So a number of us will have to pretend to be something else, mask, and all of this is coming out as eventually trauma. For some, it's like PTSD. You have to change yourself. Even a newborn, you can imagine a newborn baby coming out with a very wide sensory band with carers around them that has a narrow sensory band. So the way they handle the baby is with this band, but actually this is the band that feels it. So the gap here is owned by us from when we're born. And that's what makes life sometimes difficult from day one, that we come out. So the sort of this, not discrimination, the misunderstanding starts from cradle and goes on to grave, really.
Yeah, very
Unfortunately. And I think as the whole world population grows, it's just important to try to find a way where we're all included and can function equally together and have equal access to everything. I think that has always been important, but as the movement grows and we become more and more visible, the urgency of making sure we can fit in increases. And so it should. Government should understand that when we don't fit in, we're actually costing society more, as opposed to just broaden out the, how to fit in a way so that we all have, meaningful work, all the kind of things that we all would like to have, also to retain our dignity. So I think it's important. It's important, not specifically now, it's important full stop.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It very much feels like and I think you've coined this term before, but the last frontier of inclusion in the journey we're on, right? And so I think that's the journey we're on, and it very much feels like we're in that position right now.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I've always worked within sort of equality and diversity since I was very young. For me, human beings are human beings. We're all equal human beings. There's no one is more of a human being than another. On a human level, we're all equals. And then we've gone through all the different connotations of gender diversity, ethnicity, disability, LGBTQ+, and in pops neurodiversity. And I'm thinking, is there another one hiding out there? But I can't think of it. But this was literally hidden a lot until, the last 10 to 20 years, when the early advocates started talking about it in the late 90s. And it's now reached a pivotal point where everyone seemed to be talking about neurodiversity, which is interesting.
Definitely. And are you able to draw on any inspiration, over that 10, 20 years? You say, you've seen it, you've been aware of it, and are you able to draw on any inspiration you've seen throughout your life and your career?
I think it's just the whole, because I only knew like 7 years ago. For me, well, I found out by self-testing 10 years ago, and then it took me some years to actually get it verified. I didn't really think so much about it, to be honest, but I have drawn on my strengths throughout my career. Being ADHD and autistic, actually, in a dealing room works really well. We have 80 different kind of nationalities, and nobody was judging each other, which I really, really liked as well. And the hyper focus that I'm able to do at times when I need to really focus, for example, when you're in a dealing room and you're trading big size and everything moves very fast all the time, works very well for an ADHD brain, especially.
Yeah.
So I think people need to be aware of we're not just net takers. I mean, it's like people believe that we're not contributing, but actually we are significantly contributing to society in so many ways. I mean, there are many high-level people that are neurodivergent, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, we could go on. So I think that needs to be understood better.
And you touched on your personal journey there just for a moment. Do you mind telling me and us a little bit more about your journey with neurodiversity?
So I have one friend that I've had since I was 11, and we're still in touch with each other. And she said to me, 10 years ago, she said, "Do you think you're autistic, Charlotte?" And I was like, "No, I don't think so, actually. Why are you asking that very interesting question?" And she's like, "Well, I think I see that you're surrounding yourself with people that seem to be autistic." And I thought, maybe she's right, maybe I am. And I said, "Well, you know what? I can do a self-test just to, show you that I'm not." And then I did this online, it's called Autistic Quotient Test, and it came out and said, "Oh, you scored above the clinical threshold, you should get diagnosed." I was like, "Whoa, what's that?" And I was actually thinking, no, that's wrong. So I did another 10 tests, and I brought my children in and said, "Can you answer these questions with me? Because I think I'm answering the questions wrongly." And I genuinely didn't. It didn't click. But then I just had to lean back and say, "Okay, right, what do I do with this?" And I then had to just start thinking. I didn't have to. I started thinking about my whole life, me as a little girl, everything. And suddenly everything just sort of fell into place in such a weird way, because it changes nothing, but it kind of changes everything. So you have to look at every single thing you've done in your life with a different set of eyes. And that's a long process when you're 50 years old, as I was at the time. So yeah, it was it just opened up my eyes. Well, I mean, my family, we have a lot of neurodivergence within the family, but that's only really come to the surface after I sort of called my sibling and say, I think I might be autistic. And they just went, "Yeah."
That
I was
makes
like,
sense.
"What? What do you mean? Yeah." So nobody thought they should talk to me about my differences. And they said, well, it was okay. So my family is quite accepting. And maybe therefore it was never such a big issue. We think maybe our late father was autistic as well. And his sister says that she thinks so, looking back. And it's just extraordinary how once you know, your eyes open. And once they're open, they can never close again. So I think it's this unknown that we've just had around for so long. So people are talking about, do we have an epidemic of neurodivergence, ADHD, and autistic? That no, we don't. We've just been so hidden. It's that, right? We've just been so hidden. We were always there. We're just hidden.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it just briefly now. You said the way your family reacted is quite encouraging to hear. It was, in that way. How did your wider friendship group and then even colleagues,
Yeah.
react to such things? And I appreciate those are two different things.
Yeah, they are, and people are very different, and there's many different kind of experiences with these kind of things. So you say to someone, "Oh, I'm autistic," and in the beginning I was really like, "Whoa, I'm not going to say anything about this," because of all the stigma, and I held myself stigma and biases that I had to work my way through. And then people came up with like, "Oh, you don't look autistic," or, "Oh, do you have a special power you can?" I was like, "What? Why are you talking about this?" Right? And some people simply say, "No, you're not." I said, "Well, I am." And they went, "No, you're not." It's like, "Look, I've got an official diagnosis." And just like, "Yeah, it's wrong." And then they're like, "Oh, you're so mildly that it doesn't really matter." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so, actually. I've got 42 out of 50 autistic traits. That's hardly mildly in terms of from how they diagnose it. It's fully there. It's not marginal or anything, right?" And they were just like not having it. So some of the people that were just completely rejecting it, I just had to say, "Look, I'm on a journey here, and this is super unhelpful to me." So I had to just pull away and then just be on my journey with people who were supportive, as opposed to like almost just trolling me, right? Or gaslighting, or whatever we want to call it, because of their own ideas of what autistic means. I then, after a couple of years, sort of started telling people more wildly, because I got more used to it. And I then went to tell the boards I was working with and other people I was working with. Everybody was very gracious about it. It wasn't an issue, not to my face, at least.
Okay.
And I'm still working with the same people. So now, 10 years later, we seem to be okay. Then came the point where I was being sort of pressurized in a way from an autistic charity called Autistic Care, who said, "Look, would you go public, because it can really make a big difference to the autistic population if they have leaders like you go public to say, look, this is who I am, and talk about it." to help the whole community get the right kind of support and attention. And I had to think about that for some years. And in the end, I thought, I should probably just do that. But I had to talk to my children first, because potentially it could mean that I would lose my income, that people would not give me any more work, or I'm self-employed. So, it was a risk. There was literally no upside from going public. There was a lot of downside and literally no upside, other than the human effect you can have. And at a time for me, it felt there's all downside here. Why am I even doing that? But I then felt, you know what, someone has to speak up, right? And I said, yes, let's have a campaign where they wanted to raise money for research. And so they put that campaign together. It was a bit bigger than I had anticipated. So suddenly I found myself on Sky News, in Today's program, in all the national papers. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? At the time, I was also chairing the Institute of Directors. So I was a relatively public person, and everybody was just like all over it. And that I wasn't prepared for. I had hundreds of emails. It's coming in from all over the world, literally, from other leaders, from other directors saying, look, I'm autistic too, but I don't have the courage to say so, and I'm afraid of being discriminated against. And I just thought, this is extraordinary. Everybody was super kind, but there was also a lot of shame and fear and the kind of things that I had felt myself coming out. And I just thought, you know what, we have to do something about this. We have to try to come together. I'm trying to encourage more autistic leaders and other neurodivergent leaders. I mean, I was speaking to a professor who's dyslexic, and he had thought long and hard about it before he went public a couple of years before me. And now on his LinkedIn, it's the dyslexic professor. So just to put the point out there that this is okay. I'm a professor and I can be dyslexic, and it's okay, right? And I thought, other people can be brave, so we just try to be brave together. And the more of us that come together like that, the stronger we are, right?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it seems part of the challenge is, people don't understand it themselves.
Yeah.
And therefore that doesn't help overall, does it? Is when the person being diagnosed doesn't understand.
That's right.
And therefore the people they're telling don't understand. There seems to be this huge gap.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. And
really
to your point around leadership, it's incredibly important, but very brave, right? In order to do this as a leader and put your name on the line. And I'm sure you wouldn't refer to yourself as a pioneer, but be somewhat of a pioneer in that light, and taking the first steps towards making sure that
bring other people with you. I think by doing that, you allow other people to come into that space.
Of course, yeah.
And now I have tested it quite a lot of different ways with when I just go and say, yeah, I'm autistic and ADHD, and other people go, ooh, so am I. And then it's okay.
And,
right?
Yeah, and part of the challenge when you first started this journey was there's very little support for you in understanding and information out there, right? Which leads me to ask, a few years on, what kind of support is there for neurodivergent adults out there or leaders?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there still isn't that much. It's getting better. The UK is actually sort of doing pretty well in this space. We have some really strong advocates, especially sort of younger generation advocates that really help a lot with awareness and speak up and speak up in workplaces and everywhere. We have another initiative in the UK called Neurodiversity in Business. And that's doing very well in getting that executive buy-in. And that's the first level we need to get, the executive buy-in. It's a bit like climate change, right? Do we believe in this or do we not? Oh, okay, it seems that there's a lot of people that's neurodivergent. We need to do something. And then they say, let's do something. But then you need to take it from the words and then into the action. So we're still sort of mostly at the words. And we have hiring programs for neurodivergent people, especially autistic people. And I sort of say, look, that's great that you have a hiring program for autistic people, but what about the ones you already have in your business? What are you doing with that group of people? So if you haven't already set up an employee resource group, for example, for the employees, at least 20% of your employees will be neurodivergent. So where are they? Have you supported? And if they haven't, then they shouldn't really hire new people in, because they come into what? kind of support and what kind of culture. If you haven't started that, I think it's complicated to come in as the token autistic person that's been hired. Nobody wants to be that, right?
We've seen that in other areas of diversity.
That's right. And we've certainly had that for
Need I say-
gender in the boardroom. Yeah. I mean, when I started 18 years ago in the boardroom, I was always the only woman. I didn't really mind if people want to hire me because I'm a woman. I know they would never do it if I didn't have the appropriate experience and knowledge, because nobody would. But there was a level of expecting, for example, women and also ethnic minority to be over and above the sort of more standard men that was already in the boardroom. So this is something we need to think about with all minorities and with all diversity. Because women, of course, is not a minority, but with all the diversity needs around, is to sometimes it will start as a tokenism in a way, and we shouldn't be too opposed with that because it's a step in the right direction, and then it's for us to then prove once we're in there that actually we can do something.
Yeah, I mean, look, it needs to be viewed in a different way.
Yes,
completely.
Yeah.
What benefits are you seeing in the workplace when neurodivergent candidates are joining
when it works
or discovering their best selves?
There are some studies actually out there to say that neurodivergent people, when in the right position with the right support, their productivity is about 150%. So that's a significant upside. It's a significant upside for ensuring that people are in the right environment, have the right tools to produce and perform whatever they need to, are doing things that they enjoy doing. We all do better when we enjoy doing something. And interestingly, there's always someone who enjoys a task, no matter what kind of task it is. You can find a person who enjoys that specific task instead of some of us having to kill ourselves doing it. I mean, I look at a tax return and it literally kills me. I was like, it's there, and I'd rather clean the entire house before I do that. And then I go back to it. I've cleaned the house now, right? What can I do? I don't iron, right? But I would possibly choose to iron over that tax return just because I hate it. So make people do something they really don't like is not the way forward. Make people fit into what you enjoy doing. Make them do that, and hallelujah, there you get the productivity, right?
Yeah, definitely. And what other support would you or advice would you offer, to support people in the workplace and with neurodiverse?
I think definitely you should have an employee resource group that are for neurodivergent people. Of course, we go across all the intersectionalities. I mean, there is no area of human beings and levels of society where we are not present. We're everywhere. So once we have a group that goes across all these different intersectionalities, because of our wider sensory band, we then generally can sort of come up with suggestions to how can we make the environment better that are more universal changes. And some businesses with big neurodiversity ERGs, they have actually seen that some of the changes suggested by that group of people with the broader sensitivity bands benefits everybody. So when the lighting is very bad, for example, neurotypicals can generally hold themselves in it and they are feeling sort of okay, but they don't understand or feel that subconscious sort of bother that it actually is. But we do. We feel it quite intensely. It's like, we've got to change it. We can't be in this at all. And then it changes, and then actually everybody's productivity comes up. So those results have been seen in businesses. So if you listen to the people, it's a bit like the canary in the coal mine, right? So when it falls off the stake, then everybody gets out before everybody gets harmed. So in a sense, because of our sensitivities, we can tell when things are a bit out of whack for human beings. So if you wanted to listen to that and use us as guiding lights, you can create an environment that works for everybody to a better degree.
Yeah, I mean, look, it certainly sounds like having an internal capability to assess neurodiversity or support and nurture that within the workplace is a sensible place to start for most organizations.
I think so. When it's the employees, it's free advice, right? Why not take it?
And in ensuring a more inclusive workplace, what are your starting points? That might be one. Setting up a committee. Are there any other, I suppose,
I think
pointers?
Leaders need to lead, right? So it's pretty sure that within the leadership group there will be neurodivergent people. They need to also lead through their vulnerabilities. They need to speak up and therefore allow everybody else in their business to do the same and to be their whole self in the business. And it makes a very, very big difference. And we need leaders to understand that leading through vulnerability is a good thing. especially these days, it's where everything is going. So I think we can safely say that that would make a very big difference.
Yeah, it sounds like it would. I mean, has your diagnosis, has it shaped and changed the way you recruit people onto your board?
Not really, not really. I'm actually a really bad people recognizer. I don't know what it is, but I'm just not. So my starting point is that everybody is a good person. They start at 100% trust. 100%, you're a good person until they prove differently, right? So you start at 100% and then it's yours to lose, basically. That's how I start. And I realize most people do the opposite. They go a bit suspicious, I'm not so sure, this or that and this, and then people can build themselves up. But for me, that process is long, right? I don't want to try to think about what goes on inside someone else's head, because actually I have no chance of really knowing that. Logically, that makes no sense, right? What makes sense is that you trust until it's proven that you can't. And so yeah, that's been quite disappointing at times when it was then proven that I couldn't. But then I have to deal with that, right? Either way, I would have had to deal with that. It's just a different angle to approach it from, right? But it does mean maybe that sometimes people that are toxic, very good at manipulating and mirroring you when you think, oh wow, I'm getting along so well with this person, but all that person is doing is mirroring you, and then turn around and be a completely different person. I'm not very good at that. I'm getting a lot better, but I still want to hope. I'm 59 years old. But I prefer to be people naive. I like being people naive. I like to believe that everybody comes from a good place.
And we're heading down it's a really good point, an interesting management style, and that's the route we're heading down on this conversation, is leadership styles. But I think trusting people unequivocally and giving them the chance to break that trust is a very common and effective leadership style. Right? Not all choose to implement and adapt to that, and others wish to lead differently. But I can see how it can work really well.
It's the only way for me to function, really. And trust is a very big thing for me. There's this trust equation. Have you heard about the trust equation? So trustworthiness is credibility, reliability, and intimacy, ability to be intimate and confidential, divided by self-orientation or ego. So the bigger your ego is, the smaller your trustworthiness will be. And I think that's not so well understood. I wish I had found out this and made it. I haven't. I found it on the internet. I think it's great. I love it. Because actually you can be as credible and reliable as you want to. But if your ego is too big, you erode it, because your behaviors will be according to your ego as opposed to according to what's best for the world around you.
Yeah. And so when it comes to neurodiversity in the workplace and the recruitment of, board level executives in that space, what can executive search firms be doing differently or better in this environment?
I think, we do need to overcome a level of xenophobia, right, of fear of differences. I think there are too many people that for some reason feel that we all should be the same way. And we are still a bit busy with neurodivergent people trying to make us more neurotypical. So there's certain things we shouldn't do, like look into my eyes, for example. I'm just like, I don't want to look into your eyes. Why do I need to look into your eyes? In some cultures, that's actually disrespectful, right? So you learn to do that, and people when I was a child was like looking into my eyes. So in the end I thought, okay, God, look into people's eyes. So I was looking into eyes.
Into the windows of their soul.
Yeah, it became a problem, because if you look 2 seconds too long, then you're onto something else. And I was like, right, okay, I didn't get that until someone was like, what? Why are you staring? I said, I'm not staring, I'm just looking into your eyes. And it was not easy, right? It was not easy. And for some of us, when we do that, I don't have that so much. And I guess life experiences, it doesn't really matter in the end. When you're comfortable, it's very easy as well. It's when you're slightly uncomfortable, then it's like, I just don't really want to look at. When I'm uncomfortable, then I look here or here or here or here. It's like everywhere else. Or if I have to think, I need to take my eyes away, which most of us have to do. But there is this push for us all to be the same. And I think in the boardroom, my mantra is hire someone who doesn't fit in, because that's diversity. If you're looking for someone who fits in, it's likely that they think in the same way, or they have a similar background to you, or they somehow are fitting in too well into a homogeneous space that is not diversity, right? If you're very comfortable together, you're probably not diverse enough. If people, annoy you a bit or they do things different to you, that's diversity, right? And I think that's what we need to understand is that when you're in a boardroom, you're not there to find friends. You're there to lead a company, right? And make sure everything is all right. You're there to put your brains to work and have it coming together to form a board body that contains everything.
Yeah, definitely. And what are the challenges then with influencing the boardroom on this topic of neurodiversity?
So my challenges have sometimes been that I spend an enormous amount of time on the things I do. So I over-focus on a smaller number of things. I never watch television. I don't really read any fiction. My nighttime reading is corporate governance is really dull, right? But for me, this is very interesting. So I do that all the time. But other people do not do that. They would spend 3 to 5 hours every night watching television, often just hanging out, small talking and this. I do none of that. I just do the things I like to do. So I focus deeply on each company that I'm on the board of. I know as much as I can. I speak to as many people as I can. I dig in a lot. And then sometimes you see and hear things that comes together as a pattern of like behaviors and things start, you be able to see things are not quite the way they should be maybe. Then you have to go back into the boardroom and bring other people with you on that journey to understand what you have seen. That hasn't always gone so well. And I was like, but can you not see this and this and this and this? And they go, no. And they go maybe no for many different reasons. It can be hard to do things are easier to close your eyes for. And so you don't want to hear, the whole talk about diversity, when I say it's difficult to get diverse boards, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. We're only asking the biggest listed companies to do it. 350 companies. We're in a country of 60 million people. We're saying that we can't find an appropriate number of women, ethnic minority for 350 companies. Again, logical sense is just not present here, right? Of course it's not difficult. You're not looking, right?
Yeah, of course.
Willful ignorance is also a thing, right?
Yeah, I think it's the mindset of the board as well that drives a lot of these conversations, and the willingness and openness to consider to consider people that don't fit culturally, right? Which is again another trap. I think that many
really is.
Both executive search firms and organizations fall into, which is finding the right cultural fit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, is finding the right cultural fit doing more harm than good?
It is, if everybody ends up very much the same. I do think that a lot of executive search firms have tried to put forward diverse candidates and realizing that they get pretty much never chosen, right? I apply for things sort of on and off that I'm interested in. And more often than not, the positions end up with white men of a certain age. And now sort of when people contact me and say, please don't talk to me if you're actually looking for a white man of a certain age, or if the board is actually looking, no, we're genuinely interested, you've got all and I would take all the boxes and still not get it. And you think, I've spent so much time researching this to be prepared for everything. And actually I was just a diversity card. That's annoying.
Yeah.
And they lose a lot of diverse people in that way. Because actually we get quite tired of being that card, doing all the work and then still not get to the end line.
We see this in other minorities or across different genders.
Same thing.
It's a very similar trend.
That's right.
Which we're clearly on a journey to
rectify.
To rectify and improve on.
But with that comes a sort of a bit of male rage, unfortunately, because I hear a lot of men say, well, I can just as well give up getting onto a board because women take all the space. And I was like, yeah, except you still get 70% of all positions. So what will you do the day there is true parity with yourself if you're so upset now when it's still the vast majority that goes to your kind, right?
Yeah, it seems we're approaching it in the wrong way. It seems that we need to come back to your point about thinking, around diversity of thought rather than trying to fit people into certain boxes or genders or
It's true, but I think you have to start
as
the box ticking because that's the evolution of the cognitive understanding and maturity. And then slowly you can roll into actually doing it properly.
Yeah. Neurodiversity based discrimination is all too common. these days, and and the misconduct around that is also all too common.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you've seen
Yeah.
within reason, of course, or experience when it comes to this kind of misconduct in the working environment?
It's a big issue, actually, because slowly things have started coming to court. And the more case studies or cases you have where, like, a neurodivergent person have won a case for discrimination. I mean, I'm speaking every week. I'm speaking to someone who has been discriminated against because of their neurodiversity, and it's just so sad because it's like, again, there's not that many places to turn to when this happens. And then people sort of close ranks, and suddenly everything you do or say is bad and is wrong. And one person was told that masking as an autistic, which we have to do to make other people comfortable, but when we do it, it was ruled that then we were dangerous to children. And how that conclusion had come to that is a myth for me. I'm just like, so we've been brought up and trained since very young to behave in ways like neurotypical to fit in better, but now you're saying that that's actually not good. So you require it, but when it suits, then it's not. Then it's a problem. That's a problem, right, in itself. Then there's lots and lots of microaggressions. There's lots of intolerances. For example, if we have very sensitive hearing as one of our extra senses and need to kind of have noise-canceling earphones. So what if you're doing a job where you don't need to communicate with other people? Why does it matter that you have earphones when you work, right? But sometimes that just can't be fitted in. And that's also a problem that shouldn't be a problem. So there's a lot of these as a problem that shouldn't be a problem. So when I worked in the city, I never really went out after work. So the dealing room, generally, a lot of the people went down to the nearest pub and they would hang out there for a couple. I was tired, right? I just worked for 12 hours very intensely. I needed to go home and just de-stress myself. I had no more energy for that, so I didn't. And people were like, oh, you need to socialize, you need to. And I was like, no, like, as long as I'm in the top 10 in the room, I don't need to do anything else than staying in that place. And I ended up with a lot of the clients that were equally not interested in going out and being wine and dined and all that. So if I took a client out, we would go and see a musical. We didn't have to talk to each other at all night. Worked perfectly well for me and my clients, right? And other people's like, why are you doing that? You can't, sit and talk to them and get to. I said, they don't want to sit and talk to me, and actually, I don't want to sit and talk to them. It works. Just let me do what I'm doing. And so people just chalked these was seen as more difficult client because they weren't doing the sort of standard. So it did mean maybe that I was not as integrated into the room, but in a dealing room, it's in those days back in the 80s and 90s, it was if you perform, people respect you. That's it. And if you don't, you get sacked. So it's kind of easy rules to follow. And I can do that. So I think those are some of the things that maybe today some people would feel upset about. I was just, I was enjoying myself when I was there. I was enjoying myself when I was at home relaxing. And that was all that I was worried about. But I have heard that some has been pressurized to go and do the socializing when they didn't want to.
Yeah, it's all too common.
Yeah.
It's seen quite a lot now.
Yeah, and that just can't. That shouldn't. You need to let people be what people are. Or if you don't like to drink alcohol, people like kind of keep pushing in on you. Why are you not drinking? Why are you not drinking? Right? It's just no. We shouldn't have one set of set ways of socializing. This is the right way, and if you do it differently, you're wrong. We need to just move on from that. And also, the businesses are taking huge risks. They can get sued, right? And more, as I say, the more you get in to court with things and the cases start actually coming through, that liability rises and needs to go on to the risk register if they hadn't made sure that they educate and train everybody in, like, I think there's often in many places culture training, so you understand different cultures. The same with neurotypes. There should be neurotype training for everybody, and there should be specific training by lawyers who say if you do this and this and this, you are, at risk for being sued, and your company is at risk of being sued. So don't do that.
And you've answered my next question, really, which was how can organizations do more to educate their people around this, which is exactly that, which is to, provide their employees and their leaders with neurodiversity training. And I suppose one element I suppose would be quite important would be, highlighting the risks involved
and I think
with not being trained.
Exactly. The risk is like the financial risk, the liability risk. I mean, if you're microaggressive around your colleagues, in the end, hopefully you would get sacked, right? Unless your boss is as well, and that's the way the culture is. Well, then nobody wants to be there anyway. Not good people, at least, right? In the end, they will all go. But training should also ideally be delivered by neurodivergent people. I mean, it's a bit like, are we going to train people about ethnic minority? Are white people going to train about ethnic minority, or do we get? Do you know what I mean? It's like, how does a white person know what it's like to be a black person? We don't. I mean, we're fooling ourselves if we think so. My children are half African, but I don't believe that I understand what goes on in their shoes when they are out and about in life, right?
Yeah.
And the same as they don't expect that they understand how my world is as autistic, because they're not. So do you know what I mean? It's that. I think you got to get the right people in to do the training who can also answer questions and talk about what the world looks like from our side. We don't look at the same thing. We don't even know if this is the same color for me as it is for you, right? We don't know. We think we can be in other people's head, but actually that's quite dysfunctional to think that we can't, right?
And what's very clear is that we need more advocates and more leaders who are advocates to either lead on these training programs or to speak up and voice their concerns around this topic.
And stories, share our stories, right? Because I think it's very powerful to share our stories, and people go, "Oh gosh, I'm so happy to hear that." I thought I was the only one who experienced that. I mean, I had this thing. My sensory speciality, if you want, is smelling. So I smell everything. It's like people smell differently when they're ill. And I thought everybody could smell that because it's so obvious to me. And I realized that everybody can't. And that was quite a surprise to find out. I was like, oh. And that made me question what else is there that is different that one can do and another can't do in this. But actually, it just is that we are so different. And that is what we need to embrace and enjoy. Celebrate.
Amazing, right? You're starting to view yourself in a more, in a more positive light. That recognizing actually these aren't debilitating. These are actually, in fact, skills and things I can leverage in order to really harness who I am.
I mean, how can having a broader sensory band, like better developed senses, be a disability? I mean, how has that been turned around to become a disability? This is a neurotypical privilege, right? It's because the world is set up for the narrower band, and therefore, if you have higher developed or more developed senses, then you're disabled. Like, I'm left-handed as well, right? That was a disability 50 years ago, right? But now people don't even bat an eyelid. And that's why we want to go with neurodiversity, is that people just go, oh, different neurotype. What can I learn from that? How interesting.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we'll get there. What is it the Institute of Neurodiversity, is doing in this space?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an institute that a handful of neurodivergent people founded with me. We started in 2020 and talked for a year, put everything together. What's the purpose? What is it we want to do? And then came up to launch in October 21. But what we want to do is basically bring us together. It's like there is no community for us, and we want there to be a global community where we can meet people that are like us and talk to each other about our differences and what works and what doesn't work, support each other, all of these kind of things in neurodiversity networks in different ways where we connect, like in the businesses at home, in cities. There's some work being done to make London a neuro-inclusive city, for example. Maybe we can get all cities around the world to do the same and take one concept for one place and bring it out to another place. Nothing like that exists. And as an adult neurodivergent person, there was nowhere to turn to find community with similar kind of people. And for children, as soon as they become like teenagers, 16 basically, where there is no legal requirement to educate us anymore, we kind of fall off a cliff. Not stunned about children, because for a long time we believed that this is a children's thing. Like there is no adult or old neurodivergent people. We grow out of it. But of course we don't. We learn to hide it, and that's the masking. And so we wanted the Institute to just help all of us be able to be who we are. and bring our true self to the table. We want to celebrate who we are, and we want to connect and do research and all of these good things, and share our stories over and above all. Share our stories from all over the world, so people can come in to the Institute and see stories from all over the world about neurodivergent people.
And what impact have some of these stories already had? What have you seen?
Firstly, we have around 10,000 members and followers within a year, which was quite extraordinary from around the world. We have a number of big corporations working with us. We also have the UN contacting us, asking if we would organize and deliver the World Autism Awareness Day in April this year. So we are working on putting that together, which, again, they recognize the fact that we were global and that we are present in many countries. So it works with how the UN is set up in terms of how we can deliver autistic people talking about who we are from all over the world. So we want to talk about what we contribute and what barriers we have and what our solutions to remove those barriers so we can contribute more. To make sure that the world understands that we are not just someone that needs help. A number of us do need help, and we do need accommodation. And some of us have extra challenges in terms of additional disabilities, just like neurotypical people also have. But we want to make sure that those of us who have extra struggles, that we can help them to get the right support, the right understanding, with their neurodivergence taken into account, because that has also not always been the case.
And in terms of making, top tips in terms of, more inclusivity in the workplace, what are your kind of top tips, I suppose, for our viewers and listeners?
I think that the top tip is really to stop being afraid of differences. Understand that when someone is different to you, that's an opportunity to grow. If we can all embrace that and then treat each other with kindness and respect, then we can't go too wrong.
Fantastic. Everyone's on a journey, and everyone's going to do it at their own pace.
Yeah.
Because everyone's on their own journey, as we say. So, but how can we create the right environment that allows people to feel comfortable to self-diagnose? That's the challenge, right?
It is
self-diagnosis.
It's the stigma. The stuff has to come away. Yeah.
And the more we talk about it, the more we lead from the front.
That's right. And these kind of things make a difference, right? Because we get it out there.
Yeah.
So that definitely makes a difference. But the stigma, even my own stigma when I got my diagnosis. So I spoke to the psychologist. This is after hundreds of questions, and then they were like, "We have to ask your parents questions." I was like, "My parents are dead. I'm not that young anymore." And so we had to find other people that knew me well enough to answer questions of me. So my sister, who's 2 years older, was answering questions of me as a child. And then I had a boyfriend at that time, and he was answering questions about what Peter saw me do in different ways. But when it came down to the actual diagnosis, and she called me and said, "Yeah, actually, you are definitely autistic," I just burst out crying. I was like, my first thought was, "Oh my God, what have I done to my children?" Right? Because my biases was kind of telling me that if you're autistic, you can't be a good mother, right? And so I was judging myself by my own biases. Do you see what I mean? It's really quite, and that's what we do when we are scared. We judge ourselves by the biases that people have put into our head, and that's hard, right? And wrong. It's really wrong. And there's too much talk about shame. I've said that before. The whole shame and sadness that people have for not being able to fully be themselves, that we really need to work on some of that, all of us, I think, because authenticity is a good word that has come up a lot. I was so glad when that started coming up, actually, because I thought authentic, that's all I can be. So it's pretty good that that's now, what people want people to do. So that worked my way. But 30 years ago, it wasn't that, right? It was conformity was the word, not authenticity. So today is a lot easier to be neurodivergent than it was 30 years ago. But maybe it was even easier 50 years ago because people were more flexible. I don't know. we have a lot of, with social media and this, oh, you need to look like this, that, and the other, and your life has to be always perfect, what have you. But it's nobody's life is, right? And nobody looks perfect. We all have ugly mornings, let's face it, right? It is
I
what
know
it
I do.
is. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I do, sometimes all day, actually. So you get this, and I think we just have to be kind to each other, right? Kindness is important. And I think the more we can embrace that, the easier it becomes for all of us to be just who we are.
And whilst you're in the boardroom, you have a job to do. It's the stakes are high. Are you seeing that kindness in the boardroom?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm lucky with my boards. I don't stay on boards that are toxic. I will generally give it 2 years, and then if it hasn't improved, I'll step down. So I'm on boards I've been on for many years, and they are very good boards. I'm very happy with them. So generally, it's leaders that are well developed. They are kind. They understand that that's the way to. But they're also principled, and with values. So I have very strong values myself. I put them on top of my LinkedIn profile: collaboration, honesty, transparency, and trust. I've lived by those values all my life, and I live by them now. I do it in business and privately. I don't think you can have different values in different aspects of your life. I mean, if you cheat in your private life, you probably cheat in business as well. That's how I look at that, which makes some people uncomfortable to hear. But that's what I feel, right? Because you're not really a different person in different places. Inside, we are one person.
It's really uncomfortable being something else in another
That's right.
environment, you
Yeah.
know, and it's that authenticity and creating, you know, environments where people are able to be their best versions of themselves and their true versions of themselves.
Absolutely.
It's going to enable that person, you know,
To perform better, to do it, to live a better life. And when we're more happy, we also produce more. It's all of that comes together. When we have to go and pretend we are something that we are not, that's really problematic. Really problematic.
So now, you know, after your diagnosis, you know, you're the truest version of yourself. Some would say, right? So how has that changed, you know, the way you operate, the way you work, the way you are?
I think it has allowed me to be even more myself. I think I was always struggling with any kind of masking. I just didn't quite get what that was all about. My sister was very good. We had two very different families on my mother's and my father's side, and my sister was literally two different persons when we were in those different families. And I was like, who is she now? What is this? What's going on? And I could just be me. I think as I grew up, I learned to just try to adapt into some of that. I have seen things looking back, as I did look back on everything. For example, when I go into meetings, I was always quite inflexible with the start time. Like if the meeting starts at 9, we're on the agenda and we are going through this board meeting. Where after I was diagnosed, I thought, okay, so that is my way of doing it, but actually it's not the broader way of doing it. People need time to small talk. They need about 5 to 15 minutes to talk about the weather, yesterday's television, the traffic, stuff that just kills my brain. I'm very bad at small talk. It just, my brain is gone, it's gone somewhere else. But I realized that actually I have to allow that when I chair meetings, to allow people to get into the set of starting a meeting. So I have to tell my mind in advance, it says 9 on the paper, but it's really 9:15 before I go, right? So now we start the meeting. And then people are more ready. So you learn to accept that you are different. I think in many ways I thought, well, if everyone else can do this, then I can do it too. So I was pushing myself, for example, like socialize a lot. But I get people overwhelmed. I need just space to just be me. I need silence. I never have noise in my house. It's a very quiet household. And that's how because so much is going on in my head all the time. It's noisy enough, right? So my children were naturally always we're just functioning around each other in a quiet kind of way. We've got 2 or 3 dogs as well, and they are also, I mean, they have their moments. We all have our moments, right? But generally it's sort of quiet and calm space with all white walls, and we have our own paintings on the walls, stuff like that. So I think you just then understand your need. I understand my own needs better. And I would hope that anyone who like listen maybe to this and feel, okay, there's maybe some traits or some comparisons where they might feel themselves that they had some of that. It's always worth doing this, like if it was autism quotient, which is a test of 50 questions from University of Cambridge. And that works very well to just give you how many traits out of 50 do you have. So neurotypicals have on average 15, and autistic people have on average 35. So I've got 42, and generally from 25 and up, you're probably somewhere on the autistic spectrum, and that's just good to know. You don't have to do anything about it, but it's self-knowledge and self-insight. I would say any parents who has neurodivergent children, no matter what it is, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, ASD, whatever it is, self-test, because it's coming from somewhere, right? And that's not a blame or anything. It's just about self-understanding. And so many parents, that's why we have so many adults being diagnosed, because our children are, and we go, oh, hello, right? Not many people have a friend like I have who starts asking me, but most parents find out through their children. And it's very worthwhile. It should almost be mandatory if you have a child diagnosed to be checked out yourself, just screened to see, and where are your sort of spikes in your profile that you could benefit from learning more about.
You mentioned earlier how you viewed your neurodiversity with certain stigma.
Yeah.
When did you stop, and have you stopped, viewing that as a negative and started seeing that as more of a positive, and I suppose one might call it a superpower, but as more of an advantage?
Sure. I think it did take me some years. It took me probably a good sort of 5-6 years to actually see, but you know what, this has literally made my career. This has actually given me the ability to focus. There's so many things it has given me ability, and there are drawbacks as well. And I can live with those. I work around them. I think so. There's a lot of people talking about superpowers, and I can say, is being able to smell that people are ill a superpower? It certainly felt like it with my children when they were ill. When I get what, but then again, I went to the doctor and say, my child is ill, and they would go, no, because they couldn't measure the illness medically. So I had to go home, wait another day or two until they were so ill that the doctor could measure it, right? Because there's no such thing as smelling people's illness for doctors, right? It's not scientific enough. So that's kind of a good and a bad, right? But I knew what's going on, so I could help the children not getting too ill, but ill enough that the doctor could see it. But not all of us have what we would call superpowers, right? And I certainly don't feel I have in any other ways. And this smelling thing is actually not always a superpower. It makes it unbearable for me to be in certain places if they have certain smells, because I might smell it 100 times so much, like I have a dog's nose, right? I don't know how dogs survive being around human beings, right? So what is sometimes a big advantage is other times a big disadvantage. And we don't want people to come in and say, I'm neurodivergent, and people go, ooh, so what's your superpower? And they go, oh, I don't have any, right? That's not fair. So I think we don't want that sort of attached to us. We all have, every single one of us, neurodivergent or neurotypical or whatever, we have certain things we're better at than others. It's good if we can all find out where our strengths are and where we need more support. And therefore, our sort of North Star thinking of this is that we don't have any labels. We just drop all the labels, and we focus on the spikes in different people's profiles, where we can see where we actually can add more and have real talent, and where we need more support. So there's a professor here in the UK called Amanda Kirby, and she does a lot of work with what's called spiky profiles, and we like her a lot, because it's not about diagnosing people or anything, but it's a screening tool that shows all the spikes. And we'd like that to be used on all children as they go into school, so we can uncover all the different spiky profiles in the children as we start. If we can get children to embrace differences, we have a long-term view on this, right? Then when they become older in 20 years, we don't have all this discrimination going on, because they learned from school that we are all different, and that's good. And that's really, really important to get that in at that early stage. We need to do it now. We should have started it long ago, but we still have specialist school segregation, or we need to put these special children over here to learn separately from those children. But that's not how we learn about each other's differences, right?
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. That's been really, really good
My
and really
pleasure.
insightful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
really
for having
appreciate.
me.
Yeah, no worries. Really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. To hear more of our insights and interviews with senior leaders, you can subscribe to the Eton Bridge podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or you can watch the full interview on YouTube. Keep in touch with us via our LinkedIn page to hear regular news and insights. Thank you.